Hello there, this is James Scroff, who knows 1978, and one of the worst things about the myth of the model minority is that it traps Asians and other honorary whites in a form of racial limbo, in which they are still oppressed from the top by white society, while being resented by other people of colour for their supposed privilege, making them feel compelled to minimise and deny their oppression, being gaslit by, making excuses for, and assimilating with their white overlords for fear of losing their supposed privilege, like a victim of abuse who plays along with and enables their abuser when they're victimising somebody else because they're scared that if they don't, then the abuser will focus all of their attention on them. Indeed, while a cultural obsession with purity means that anti-black racism and colorism are rampant in many Asian cultures, with interracial relationships still being taboo, the plastic surgery and skin bleaching industries earning billions by making Asian women look more white, and anime infamously idolising whiteness while still drawing black characters as racist stereotypes on the rare occasions when they ever draw them at all, that is only part of the story. Because in America in particular, white society has spent decades actively exploiting this existing cultural racism and drumming up tensions between Asian immigrants and other people of colour, just as they did when they declared the Irish, Italians and other Catholics to be white as well after centuries of oppression and discrimination to prevent them from teaming up with black people, and creating the myth of the model minority for the express purpose of keeping the oppressed fighting amongst themselves instead of uniting against white supremacy.
In the 1960s, government officials looked at socioeconomic data from African American communities and contrasted it to the so-called family values and stability of Asian Americans. Now, this fueled racist claims that black people had no one to blame but themselves if they experienced poverty and other social disadvantages. Conservatives went on to use these claims to justify making cuts to many essential social programs for African Americans and other disadvantaged minority groups.
They were even used to argue against civil rights.
Come on, you don't see Computer complaining about fair and equal protection. Asians earned their place in this country. Why can't you?
What? No, Uncle Sammy, you helped Asian people. Why can't you see that?
And the model minority myth hurts Asian people too. If an Asian American student is struggling in school, many teachers assume that they don't really need extra help. And it's not true that all Asians are crazy rich and successful. The poverty rate for Asian Americans is actually higher than the national average.
So while I'm dismayed by the fact that this infighting still exists, with, according to one Korean-American friend of mine, some black people on Facebook saying that they don't care about the Atlanta terrorist attack since those honorary whites always side with whitey when black people are being murdered by the police and what have you, I'm happy to say that this is changing. Younger Asians in particular are turning against the see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil attitude of their parents and grandparents with regard to racism and white supremacy, not only against their own communities, but against anyone who isn't white, and people of colour are working together against racism like never before, because as I explained in the first video in this series, far from actually being privileged as the terrorist attack in Atlanta following a year of increased abuse and violence demonstrates, the model minority was always the worst kind of don't ask, don't tell denial, with far from all or even most Asians who live in predominantly white countries being the hyper-successful Cinderellas that white society portrays them as being for the sole purpose of telling other people of colour that their poverty and disenfranchisement are their own damn fault, so they just need to stop complaining and work harder like the good ones do, the reality being far more bleak.
America is so racist. Why are Asians the highest earners in America?
Do you know that Asian Americans face the highest poverty rates in New York City? Chinatown restaurant and construction workers live here in 64 square feet cubicles for $9 a day. 1 in 4 elders live in poverty. Some collect 5-cent cans to make ends meet. Or what about ICE deporting Cambodian Americans who came here as children fleeing from a genocide that the US helped create? But when you think of Asian Americans, you think Crazy Rich Asians and Netflix's Bling Empire. Only model minority stories are publicized, while disadvantaged Asian Americans get ignored. The groups at the top were only led in the US if they were already rich and educated, and the groups at the bottom are usually refugees. This model minority myth not only erases Asian suffering and struggles, it's also used to demonize the Black and Latino community for living in poverty by denying the existence of systemic racism.
After all, if Asians are all such naturally talented and hyper-successful wunderkind who get straight A's and go to Harvard, then why were the 6 Asian women targeted by the Atlanta terrorist working in massage parlours? The disgusting answer to that question given by far too many people is because they were Asian whores, either implying or in the worst cases outright declaring that they brought it on themselves, and this brings us on to the issue of the hypersexualization of Asian women, which I'll be addressing in part 3.